We got Gators Breakdown here. We know we're business.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I am your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Joining me right here on this Monday night, co-host Will Miles. Got lots to get into. You can find him at Read and Reaction at Will Miles SEC. Will, never a dull moment. I mean, it's just, you joked about it with me the other day, not long ago. I forget what the story was, but I never knew. And I know I say this over and over again. Never knew what I was getting myself into by coming up with that moniker. But looking back at it, it was just so easy to come up with. We got Deshawn Purdie, who signed with Florida, now getting released from Florida. He'll be going back to the portal. Some more transfer portal news. And then we'll get into what we didn't get into last week. There was some of the fan favorites, some tweets I put out in the last few weeks or so. Finally getting back around to it past the holidays and all that. But plenty to get into right here on this episode of Gators Breakdown.
Yeah, it's funny. I've had a few things go on at work recently. So my boss said never a dull moment. He doesn't know. I mean, he knows I do this, but he doesn't know, like, he doesn't follow us or anything. He's not a Florida fan. So I sent him the thing you always put up on X. Yeah, never a dull moment in Gator Nation. I'm like, yo, Gator Dave, some royalties on that one there, Joel. And it was a little bit of a laugh there at work. And then I think I reached out to you and said, hey, like, it's not just Florida. But then I told him all the stuff that's going on with the Florida program, and he goes, oh, okay. Like, now I know what you mean. Like it's just a walk in the park here, because there's always all sorts of stuff going on.
It's funny with the Purdy stuff. People are like, oh, it just happens everywhere. I'm like, no, it doesn't. I'm like, the sheer number of stories like this, like, yeah, it may happen here or there sparingly for one team or another. It's just never done. It really lives up to it. I mean, that's one reason we all follow this and get so ingrained in it, is because Florida is just unique, polarizing, lightning strike program, and unique stories. It really is that way for Florida, and just seems to happen a lot.
Yeah, it's not good or bad. Well, I mean, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but it's definitely unique.
Right. It's good and bad, yeah.
It's definitely unique. No, I was sitting at dinner tonight. We were eating dinner as a family, and I told my wife, reminded her I had the podcast tonight. My son looks at me, he's like, isn't the season over? What do you talk about now that the season's over? And I'm like, dude, you have no idea. There's more to talk about now than there was while the games were going on. And he just sort of shook his head and was like, you're crazy. And this is the one who's not into football. So yeah. He's like, I don't know. You want to go have a catch? I'm like, no, I got to prepare for the podcast. Let's go. There's all sorts of stuff going on.
That's why we're able to do this. Like I said, Florida just provides. And like, I never really stress about, there's not really anything to talk about. There's never a dull moment. It lives up to it. Now, maybe you can take it too far in some areas, but most of the time, there's plenty to talk about.
We are at the leading edge of name, image, and likeness, whether it's well, usually it's just weird. It's like, from when it first started, you got the stuff with Rashada, and now you got this going on with Purdy and all the stuff in between. It has been a wild ride for college football, a wild ride for NIL, and a wild ride for the Florida Gators as the new age of college football has come upon Billy Napier in the program. So, hey, we're here to catalog it all. We're here to talk about it. We'll probably be wrong every once in a while as we're sitting here looking at it as things change underneath our feet. But always a lot to talk about, man. Like you said, never have to worry about what's the topic going to be this week. It usually presents itself sometime over the weekend, so that the prep time is limited, but that's all right.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right, let's get to it. We will talk all this drama with Deshawn Purdie. Kind of just filtered out over the weekend, starting Friday, Saturday. Was this talk about him maybe being released from Florida and maybe heading to Georgia, but that's maybe not the case right now as we look to that. And then, of course, the fan favorite players and maybe what that means for 25, because the names you guys came up with, and if you saw the graphic, you can kind of figure it out. But the names you guys come up with as your fan favorite players for 24 speak a lot about the 2025 Gators, so we'll get into that right here on this episode of Gators Breakdown. Everybody hit that like button if you don't mind. Subscribe right here on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. And, of course, Gators Breakdown Plus, you can get that description or that discussion. Keep it on going right there in the Discord. Link is in the description to join Gators Breakdown Plus. Keep that conversation going right there. So, all right, Monday afternoon transfer quarterback Deshawn Purdie. Not long with the Gators. Withdrew his paperwork with the Gators, meaning he's now back on the market. And then Chris Hummer of 24/7 Sports adds, Will, that, quote of note, once a player signs a grant of A with an ACC school, they're not allowed to be contacted by another SEC program, even while released per a source, in his quote. The thought is that when Purdy signed, that he signed papers for Florida and for the SEC, and that it is the SEC side of the agreement that does not allow him to transfer in the conference. And that's key because over the weekend and all day Monday, the thought was he would leave Florida and go to rival Georgia. So now that does not look like to be the case. So very interesting storyline. We'll get into the player and maybe what Florida's now missing in a backup quarterback. But just on the surface of this, it just topsy-turvy and left and right of what's going to happen with Purdy. And it was the optic of, hey, losing another player to Georgia after, now another portal player last week decided to decommit from Florida, and Adrian Maddox, when he left Florida and go to Georgia, well, just a week later, we're going to happen again, just in this weird way. But now, at least we got some clarity that it may not be possible for him to transfer in conference.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think that sounds an awful lot like illegal restraint of trade, and seems like something that, if pushed, I'm not sure that college football or the conferences are necessarily going to stand up against. I think there's probably I'm going to say it's a non-zero likelihood that Purdy ends up at Georgia if that's a guy that Kirby Smart wants. It's a new age of college football. I mean, obviously, I think everybody's experiencing that. NIL is completely different. There are no real contracts associated with these sorts of things. There's no guarantees to the player because you're not allowed to do pay for play, quote unquote. But that also means there's no guarantees from the player to the organization, right? I mean, you sign financial aid paperwork, but that's it. And so getting released from, and the other part is you got to be able to attract the next guy who wants to come in. And so if you get obstinate and decide not to release somebody who wants to leave, well, now that's something that people can use against you as well. And so it is a free market without any sort of restrictions right now, other than how much money does each organization have. And you see this all the time with I mean, I can remember when I graduated from school and I took the first job and sort of looked around after a little while and said, I could make more money someplace else. And it wasn't that long before I wound up jumping to that next thing. It just so happens that these are 18-year-old kids who probably have less maturity than I did when I was 22. Maybe that's debatable. And then we're just adding another zero to the end of the salary, right? I mean, I come out of school and I'm making, I don't know, probably $36,000 or $40,000. They're making $400,000. And the question is, when those zeros start to change, does it change the calculus? No, not really. I mean, there was nothing keeping me at that first job out of school. There's nothing keeping these guys at the program, assuming somebody else is going to offer them more. Now, the SEC to SEC thing is interesting from the standpoint of that is something that somebody like Purdy would need to challenge. It's probably a easier road to go someplace else. But, if somebody like Clemson decides that it's worth paying him to have him on there, or somebody like, Florida State.
North Carolina was the other school originally when it was Florida, Georgia, North Carolina in the original round of transfer portal visits.
Yeah, but I mean, again, a dark horse could always show up, somebody who misses on a quarterback and decides they can come in and sort of pry somebody away. That's maybe the thing that's probably frustrating. I mean, I understand it, and I'm not going to blame the player for it, but I think one of the frustrating parts is that you've got a guy who's decided to come. And even in recruiting, like you'd get flips, but the flips were kind of few and far between. And it feels like with NIL and the transfer portal specifically that there's nothing to just shutting down where you're going to go, right?
It's
there's
never
always
over.
there's always a possibility somebody will come in and snipe the player that you had or that you wanted, and that's just sort of the reality. But that's the way markets work. And because the NCAA refuses and the conferences refuse to classify these folks as employees and have standardized contracts associated with it. Now that requires a whole bunch of other stuff for collective bargaining and unionization and those sorts of things. But because they have drugged their feet and not allowed that, it means they're not able to put any contract restrictions on these things, right? I mean, the NIL agreements are not allowed to actually be tied to did the kid play. Now, depending upon who you listen to, and if you go read Darren Heitner's X feed and listen to some of the contracts that he's been looking at and some of the other lawyers as well, there's some stuff snuck in there by the universities. But the problem is that they're not valid, right? So if you get too aggressive in terms of enforcing the contracts, then the courts are going to come in and force you to allow the players to move. And this whole thing has just sort of been an exercise in lawsuit avoidance by the NCAA, which is why the players have so much power and all the power that they have right now in terms of moving back and forth. So, it's an economic problem, not a football problem. And so people who loved college football because of the football aspect of it, I get it. Like, it's a completely different world in terms of what you have to follow and how you build a program. For folks like me who look at it as an economic problem and they're fascinated by it, it was kind of an interesting thing to sort of see where it's going to land and see how it impacts different programs. And quite honestly, see who's going to figure out how to get an edge to take advantage of these sorts of things. And so, a kid like Purdie, I don't know what the offer is. I don't know, whether it's an equivalent offer or whether, Florida just turned out not to be the right fit when he got there. I suspect that's probably not the case. But, you said we'll talk about the player. We're not talking about DJ Lagway here.
Right. And part of this was the report of, or there's different reports out there that for whatever reason changed his mind about the competition. For whatever reason, some thought that he might be able to compete for the starter. Come on.
So basically he saw DJ Lagway in practice and said, shit. like I'm never playing here.
In a way, that's kind of funnily, like if you were to draw a cartoon of this, that's probably what the cartoon would be like. Like if it was a Sunday comic, that to me, that's how it would be drawn out. Whether it's true or not, that's just kind of how it would be.
So I've had a lot of criticism in my time here of Billy Napier, and there are still things that I'm sure I'm going to criticize. But one thing he has never been accused of, other than by Rashada, but that was sort of necessary, I think, because of the lawsuit aspects of things. One thing he's never been accused of is being disingenuous, right?
Yeah.
His players have, to a man, talked about how open and honest the guy is and how genuine he is. And if you talk to anybody who's talked to him, they'll say the same thing. Whether that's what you need in a head football coach in the SEC is a completely different argument, but that's something that I think is pretty well established at this point. I can't imagine a scenario in which they made an offer and had conversations with Purdie where it wasn't clear to him that he was the backup quarterback to DJ Lagway and that was the entire purpose. Right.
Imagine DJ Lagway hearing, "Hey, we offered this guy he's going to compete with you for the starting job." And you want to tell that quarterback that? I mean,
you could tell him that. He's just going to be like, "Whatever, guys. Like, you all know that ain't happening." So,
right.
I mean, Lagway seems like a pretty confident fella. I'm not sure he'd be all that scared. I mean, look. Purdie wasn't great for Charlotte last year, right? QB rating of 136.2. He ran for negative 3.2 yards per play, so he's taking a bunch of sacks. Like, this is not a guy that I like profile and look at and go, oh, like, yeah, he could be awesome. I mean, basically, it's Tyler Murphy. It's when Jeff Driscoll goes down with a broken ankle. Do you have a guy like Tyler Murphy who can step in and win a game or two? Or do you go to what we did last year in the second half against Georgia, or the last three quarters against Georgia, and the whole game against Texas, where you just have zero shot at the offense really putting up much of a fight, and you get blown out? And that's what Purdie was. Purdie was insurance in case Lagway couldn't stay healthy over the span of an SEC season.
I don't know if he was that much though.
Well, I mean, so I think some of it, I would argue that Charlotte's supporting cast should be considerably inferior to Florida's. I think there are things you can do to make him a better player. But I mean, he was insurance, right? I mean, I'm not Like, I'm not convinced Purdy would have won the backup job given the guys that Florida has coming in, but it was at least a body, right? And you're sitting there going, given what Florida has, and this is one of the challenges when you bring in a guy like DJ Lagway. And one of the arguments I made last week is it looks like the quarterback transfers are making things more even. Like, I'm not sure overall rosters are getting more even based on the transfer portal, but looks like quarterback transfers are making things more even. And if that's the case, then what that means is you're not going to have a situation where you have Jacoby Brissett and Jeff Driscoll sitting on the same bench at the same time, right? That situation would never happen again. And, when Muschamp,
it's going to be rare.
Well, and when they send the guy out there to take the first snap of the year and then sit him on the bench for the rest of the game, like that would probably be, I'm going to the portal right now. Those sorts of things just aren't going to exist. It's a relic of the past. And honestly, I don't know what was in Purdy's head. I don't really care all that much. I just sort of look at it and say, okay, it's time for Florida to go find a guy who's at a mid-level school who, sort of fits the profile of a Clay Millen, who they brought in last year. Like, I thought that was an excellent addition through the portal. And
there's so much in there. And I'll maybe ask around again. Couldn't get much during the season. Was he hurt? Did he stink in practice once he moved up? I mean, that was a mystifying one because there were some pretty good underlying stats early in his career at Colorado State. And Aiden Warner's the guy after DJ Lagway goes down.
Well, I mean, when you look at what happened in that Texas game in particular, you're sitting there going, it can't be worse than this.
Yeah.
This is bad, but I mean, how bad could it be? Like, how much worse could it get? So, yeah, I mean, there's all those questions, but that's the guy, that's the kind of guy you figure they'd be looking for, right? Is a guy who's looking for who's looking to be the backup. In fact, and it's ironic to say this, they need Graham Mertz. Like, they need that guy, the guy who was like a high-profile recruit, pretty consistent, really good on like quick game and intermediate, a cerebral guy who doesn't have all the physical tools, but is reliable and that sort of stuff. And they need that guy to come in and be like, I understand I'm the backup. I understand I have a clipboard. I understand I'm going to play in the second half against who's the first game of the year? It's
Long Island.
Against Long Island. I get that's where I'll get the most snaps for the entire year, but I'll be ready if a hamstring pull happens again in the first half against a rival. I'll be ready if, there's a read option and all of a sudden, you got a concussion or a hurt shoulder or something like that. And somebody's got to come in like that. I mean, to me, at this point, Florida needs fire insurance for DJ Lagway, because Lagway is the reason for the optimism for the 2025 season. And if you don't get all 12 or all 13 games out of him, you're going to be really stressed with trying to make sure that you're able to accomplish the things that Billy Napier needs to accomplish in 2025 and even 2026. So that was what Purdy was. Purdy was fire insurance, and he's no longer around. And so you're going to need some more.
Yeah, the best thing I liked about him was a different style of backup quarterback than what Florida had. I did ask the question last year, could you have a more mobile quarterback there behind Lagway? Could you create, or could you recruit, could you get more guys, that are backups that fit that mold where, you're an option with your legs there. And Purdy certainly was, I think that to some regard. You mentioned his rushing numbers. There did take a lot of sacks, but had that ability, and maybe that was part of the supporting cast and the offensive line that you were maybe discussing a bit, Will. But hopefully, I said when he originally committed, hopefully he's nothing more than just a mop-up duty and a just-in-case quarterback. Any illusions of him starting, whether he really thought that or, that's not married in any kind of reality. So from my understanding, Florida, never told him he'd be competing or for the starting job. He had to know the reality of the situation with DJ Lagway here. Look, I'm not getting bent out of shape for a backup quarterback, a just in case quarterback. I can't go that far with it. Quarterback's different. I think if it all goes like we want, he never plays the meaningful snap in the next two seasons. And if he is the guy, and kind of going back to that point, what are you missing here? What are you getting here? Was he really winning a game against most of Florida's schedule? I doubt it. If Florida had to start him against most of the schedule, I think it's pretty much game over anyway. Could he be a better option than Aiden Warner? Sure. And that's kind of what we're alluded to a little bit earlier. And does that mean he's going to go out there and win games? It doesn't. So, sure, I'd rather have him than not, but I can't sit here and get bent out of shape with him leaving. Of course, there were the optics of possibly losing him to Georgia, but maybe that's not the case now either. I don't even know if he starts there. If he was to transfer to Georgia, found a way to transfer to Georgia, I'm not sure he's starting there either. So, yeah, I was giving him credit originally for wanting to come and sit behind Lagway, but if he really wanted to start, it makes no sense to go to Florida. Makes no sense to go to Georgia, in my opinion. Go transfer to a school where you can play, go build up your profile, then transfer to with your bigger market value the next season. But if at Florida, I think no more than pairing him with a healthy DJ Lagway, playing maybe 4 games, red shirt, put another year in between him and Lagway. Maybe down the road, he's a guy, but not getting bent out of shape for somebody. I just don't think it really affects Florida all that much.
He's not beating out Will Griffin either. Like, let's be honest. As the new recruits come in, they're going to displace this guy. But again, I think this is one of those things where you think about, so we need to be thinking about college football like NFL programs in some respects, right? And so there is immense value. So if you think about the Vikings, they're playing tonight as we're recording. The Vikings have Sam Darnold playing, and Darnold was thought of as a serviceable backup and has turned into more than that in O'Connell's system there in Minnesota. And Minnesota's season is not lost, even though JJ McCarthy went down to start the year. And I think that's what and if you look at some other teams in the NFL who lost their starting quarterbacks, that's not the case. How good were the Jaguars when Trevor Lawrence went down? Well, how good were the Jaguars when Trevor Lawrence was in there?
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like if Patrick Mahomes goes down for any length of time, is Carson Wentz leading them to where they want to go?
No. We got our preview the last regular game of the season.
Well, but again, can Carson Wentz help them win a couple of games and not, like, let's say Mahomes was out for 5 or 6 games this year. Could he go 3-3? And then Mahomes comes in and, maybe the Chiefs go 11-5 or 11-6 for the entire year and make their way into the playoffs. Sure. Absolutely. And so I think that's what you're looking for from a backup quarterback. Like, he doesn't have to be perfect. You know what I mean? Like, so the playoff has really changed, I think. So the playoff has changed things, in my opinion, more than NIL in some respects, because your roster construction can be different. Florida doesn't need DJ Lagway to be healthy in all 12 games next year and make the playoff. Now, if he's only healthy in 10 of them, they need to win 10 of them. But they can actually lose those other 2 if Lagway wins the 10. But if Lagway's not perfect and he goes 9-1 and he misses 2 games, then you need a guy in there who can go 1-1. And if you look at Purdie, and this isn't specific to Purdie, but if you look at him, QB rating 136.2, yards per attempt 9.0. So he's a guy who likes going deep, which obviously is something that DJ Lagway does very, very well and something that Napier's offense can allow. But again, it's always the question I always ask people for just about anything when it comes to college football is compared to what? And Aiden Warner averaged 4.6 yards per attempt and a QB rating of 68.3. So you've gone, essentially Warner, if he replicates last year's stats, you have 0 chance of going 1-1. Purdie, if he replicates last year's stats, it kind of depends, right? If you're playing Texas, you're probably losing that game.
Right.
But what if you're playing an LSU team where Garrett Nussmeier is struggling? Or what if you're playing a FSU team to end the season? And
that's where I was going to go. I don't know if he's good enough to be even the second tier of teams. Like, it would have to, like, break out perfectly and probably towards the beginning of the season.
Well, but again, I go back to even the beginning of the season. Like, what about Kentucky? Right? Is there a possibility that you maybe win a defensive battle against Kentucky where you've got somebody who's able to take care of the ball and hit a couple of big shots? Like, hell, I'm thinking about the game that Austin Appleby won years ago where he hit one pass, like the entire game.
The Tyree Cleveland.
It's a deep pass down the sideline from his own territory. And that's pretty much the entire ball game. I think that was the same game where Voshon Joseph sent the LSU quarterback flying into the stands, right? And so I don't know what Florida's defense is going to do. It's entirely possible that they take another step forward. And if that's true, and really it comes down to if you like, I don't know whether a guy like Purdy or whoever else they bring in is going to be able to win a game against Kentucky or win a game against Ole Miss or win a game against Florida State. I can't be sure of that, and neither can you. But I think we can both be sure that if we get the same level of quarterback performance that we did against Texas, Florida's cooked.
Yep.
And that's the reality, is that this is, I've said it repeatedly, it's fire insurance for Lagow. It's and like I said, he walked in and I was like, oh, I guess it really is an open competition, because sorry, not gonna get that job.
Yeah. And look, we'll see. There's some reports Florida maybe going after another transfer quarterback. So we know obviously Florida's in the market for one. But quick question. There was this big debate of how you would do this, and we'll kind of move on quickly from this. But if let's just hypothetical here. I don't do a lot of hypotheticals, but let's have a little bit of fun. If he was able to transfer to Georgia, would you make him wait till the spring portal to where he can? Because the spring once you get to the spring portal, you can't transfer in conference. So would you have played the game and just, all right, fine, if you want to go to Georgia, or would you have allowed him to transfer or make him wait and not allow the transfer in conference? Looks like Florida and whatever paperwork, that's going to be the case anyway. But there was some thought over the weekend, well, no, we'll just hold him, make it where he can't transfer in conference, and then he can go somewhere else. But look, my angle would have been, you chose to commit to us, signed with us. I'm not letting you out of this agreement just to go to a rival. Everybody knows how much I hate Georgia anyway, so of course I'm going to be heavy petty on this one. I just don't, and to me, I don't think it will make Florida look all that bad. I just don't. The thought is he will transfer. The thought that he could transfer to Georgia with this ad drop and then in this next couple of days, that was a possibility as well. But Florida could have made him wait until the spring. That portal opens up. If he wants to hop in then, since players aren't allowed to transfer in the conference, go to the spring portal, either go walk on at Georgia with a good NIL deal or transfer outside of the conference, which I think he should just do anyway. Go build up that game a little bit. But look, if Georgia's going to tamper like this, I'm going to play hardball. I'm not saying tampering is bad, because every school out there does it. But since it's Georgia and you want to do it here to Florida, I'm going to make you pay. So I would have been petty. I would have made him wait, and no, you ain't transferring in the conference.
I mean, so there's a PR battle you have to win
That's
to
true.
do that. And Florida has not proven to be all that savvy when it comes to PR, whether it's Jaden Rashada or whether it's Strickland throwing students out of the game against Tennessee the other day. They seem to struggle at times with some of those sorts of things and perception. But irrespective of all that, are we trying to win or not? Right? Like this isn't like, oh, he's going to miss art class up at Georgia and he's not going to be able to get a job because he didn't get his degree because he wasn't able to sign up for the right classes.
Yeah.
Like that's not what's happening. Like what's happening is that Georgia's starting quarterback's going to get hurt and we're going to be facing Purdy next year because you let him go. Right? And I'm sitting there going, when people get mad when I talk about a top 10 class not being good enough from a recruiting perspective because you're behind 6 other SEC teams when that happens, my comeback is always, would it be okay to be 6th or 7th in the SEC on the field in the fall? Then why is it okay in recruiting? Like it's a competition. You're supposed to try to win. And so it applies to the transfer portal too. It's a competition. You're supposed to start to win. You're supposed to try to win, which means it's a cost benefit analysis, right? If you hold on to Purdy and you're petty, to use your words, which I think more than anything, it's if you're executing the terms of the written agreement that's in front of you.
Yep.
If you're doing that, and if you're making him fulfill his commitments based on what he's already done, and you're savvy enough from a PR perspective, and you don't think it's going to harm you with other recruits, then sure, yeah, you hold on. I don't think you do it to be petty. I think you do it because it's the best thing for your program to try to beat Georgia next year. And if it doesn't hurt you on the back end because you're able to sell it to anybody new who's coming in, then fine. Right. But that's always the calculus that I think you have to make these days is if you're letting somebody out of an agreement and this happens all the time in other professions too, right? Like it's not necessarily like if you ever hear about nuisance lawsuits, right? It's something that just gets settled, even though even though you might not be at fault, but it's going to cost you more in lawyer fees than it's going to cost you to actually settle it. And so a lot of big businesses will just settle the suit because whatever, it cost me X and it would have cost me more to go hire a lawyer and defend myself. I feel like in many ways it's the same way with this kind of calculation. It's what is the cost associated with letting him go? What is the cost associated with keeping him here? And if the cost of keeping him here is more than the cost of letting him go, you let him go. If the cost of letting him go is less than the cost of keeping him here, you keep him here. So it's a cost-benefit analysis, not a pettiness analysis. But again, I do think that the tweaking of the rival is part of that cost-benefit analysis, right? Because from a PR perspective, if you get Florida fans going, oh, you're going to actually take it serious and you're going to try to beat our rival, and you're not going to be like, well, oh, shucks. Well, we can't harm the kid because that would be the wrong thing to do in the long term. And then Kirby comes out and beats you with him.
Yeah.
That ain't going to be a very good PR hit either. So, you do need to make that determination.
And it kept Florida back from going to go get another quarterback, thinking that they already had one in here. So, you know what, that would be another thing for me here. No, okay, you're going to sit around. You hurt us a little bit, so sorry, tough luck.
Again, I think Florida has, if Florida has the cards to be able to do that, they're within their rights to do it, as long as they fulfill their end of the commitment, right? So if there's an NIL deal associated with it, they got to pay him those funds while he's there. That was agreed to, right? And as long as they're doing all that stuff on the up and up, no problem with it. This is a competition. This is major college football. The TV contract with ESPN is in the billions of dollars. Like, we're not talking about JV high school or JV middle school football here, where like, oh shucks, if he goes to the crosstown rival, we might lose a JV game. That ain't what we're talking about here. We're talking about a major business, and you do things that are in the best interest of your business at all times. Now, look, I mean, sometimes that means giving away things for free. Sometimes that means treating customers well, even if they don't deserve it. Like there are all sorts of compromises you have to make in the span in the course of running a business, because in the long run, not holding on principle is probably better for you long term than just like digging your heels in for no reason other than you want to dig your heels in because somebody hurt you or insulted you or something like that. So I think that's the thing, is emotionless, take a step back and say, okay, what's best for the program? What's best long term? And we'll make our short-term decisions based on what's best long term, just like any business or organization would. And it's the same thing if somebody walked in and signed paperwork with the New York Jets and then decided they wanted to play for the Patriots the next day. You can do that. You can ask the Jets to tear up your contract. They're under no obligation to do so. And we wouldn't look at that and even question it, right? We wouldn't go, oh, free agents aren't going to want to sign with the Jets in the future. There are other reasons they don't want to sign with the Jets, but we wouldn't say, oh, no one will sign with the Jets because the Jets are holding this guy to the contract he signed, right? We'd go, no, he was an adult. He signed a contract, so he wants to go to the Patriots. Boo-hoo. Like, the Patriots need to give up something of value if they want this player. And that therein lies the rub, right? Is that there has to be value for Florida to do it, and that's the evaluation, at least in my mind.
Yeah. So that was a hypothetical. Yeah, I'd make him wait till the spring. But anyway, go back one more time. Deshawn Purdie withdrew paperwork with the Gators, now back on the market. And of note, as Chris Hummer of 24/7 Sports says, once a player signs a grant of aid with an SEC school, they're not allowed to be contacted by another SEC program, even while released. So the thought is he signed papers at Florida and for the SEC, and that it's the SEC side of the agreement that does not allow him to transfer in conference. And that's pretty key because Georgia was thought to be the destination. So there we go. We'll see what happens with Deshawn Purdie. And, I mean, who knows if it's even over with, but it seems to be over with on the Florida side. So
he'll be back in 2 days. That's the way these things roll, man.
So there we go. We'll keep it with quarterback and transfer portal, though. Pete Nakos of On3 reporting that both Florida and Georgia, so here we go, not over with, have been in contact with the transfer quarterback. Buffalo quarterback CJ Ogbonna has received interest from the Gators and the Bulldogs since entering the portal last week. According to his agent, Brian Miller, that he told On3, the Bulls starting quarterback threw for about 2,400 yards last year, 19 touchdowns this past season. Also rushed for 343 yards, 8 touchdowns. Former Southeast Missouri State transfer. He's thrown for about 4,000 career yards, 32 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. Ogbonna played 2 seasons at Hutchinson Community College from 2019 to 2020. So a lot of this comes in, while we go back that far, is because of the waivers that are out there, with the NCAA Division I Board of Directors approving a blanket waiver granting an additional year of eligibility to former junior college transfers in light of the preliminary injunction against the NCAA and the Diego Pavia lawsuit. The Buffalo transfer is hoping to be granted a 7th season of eligibility. So he's got to get that before you can even have him as an option as a backup quarterback here at Florida. But talking to Florida and Georgia, so interesting that starting at Buffalo. I don't know why he'd go be a backup at Florida or Georgia. Seems like he could probably maybe go get a starting job somewhere. But maybe the money at these bigger schools mean more. So that's the only thing I can really think of, Will, when we talk about NIL, when we talk about transfer portal. We won't spend a whole lot of time on this till we find out more. But interesting that it's just another Florida-Georgia quarterback storyline here.
Yeah, so I mean, I think some of that is if you don't think you're going to have an NFL future, now's the time to grab funds that are going to be available, right? So yeah, you're a starter at Buffalo, but you become a backup at Florida, and now you've got multiple avenues to go become a GA and a coach as things progress, right? Quarterbacks tend to be the guys who go into the coaching profession most often, and so those backup quarterbacks, again, I think this is a place where from an NFL perspective, when you think about building an organization, that's who you'd want. I'm actually more excited about Ogbonna than I was about Purdie.
For sure.
Similar QB rating, so 131.8, 7.1 yards per attempt, a little bit higher completion percentage, but also averaged 3.2 yards per rush, and was 4.2 his junior year, and now 2.8 his senior year. But again, this is a guy who, when he goes back there, is going to be able to make some plays with his legs. Anytime you see a guy who doesn't have negative rushing yards, you're pretty sure that he's not a statue back there. So the other thing is, if you go look at like a guy like Mertz, he had a QB rating at Wisconsin of 127.7. So, and then went 159.1 at Florida. So Napier has clearly proven that when he takes a guy who's got experience in another program and has played pretty poorly, that he can get more out of him than maybe some other people would. So again, it's fire insurance, right? We're talking about who's going to be the backup DJ Lagow. But to your point, I think the two things that I would point to is, as a backup quarterback, if you're a backup quarterback in the SEC, then that means you're not an NFL prospect. And so if there's money attached to becoming a backup quarterback, it's worth it. And then everything's about network, man. And so, all of a sudden, if Billy Napier and Billy Napier's staff and Buffalo's head coach and Buffalo's staff, you've got more opportunities than if you were just at Buffalo independently. And, given the fact that what you say, he's going to be 7th year, should be 26 years old heading into this year. It's time to start thinking about your future, man. It's that old NCAA commercial. Like, not everybody goes professional in sports. They go professional in something. It's time to think about that. That's what's going on here.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Keep it going here. Transfer portal. So for now, we know with Purdie gone, the transfer portal for Florida as of now is edge Kofi Asari, wide receiver J. Michael Sturdivant, punter Tommy Doman. That makes up the portal class. So now we'll go to it with some news from the portal. Had some DB targets ahead or head elsewhere to Georgia and Miami, of course, through the transfer portal. Keyshawn Silver goes to USC. Not many options at offensive tackle, it looks like, overall at defensive tackle either. So we'll see what happens at those spots there. But Florida's still hosting players from the transfer portal and will be hosting players from the transfer portal. Was supposed to be a bigger this past weekend than it was, but with some defensive backs on campus, but they couldn't make it due to snowstorms. So only Miami's Isaiah Thomas made it in this past weekend. So Florida is now in reschedule mode for Southern Miss cornerback Michael Caraway and NC State cornerback Brandon Cisse. Both look to reschedule this Thursday. Cisse has made visits to South Carolina and Ole Miss so far. Sounds like South Carolina might hold the edge right now. Cisse is from the state of South Carolina, so we'll see there. But also it came out Bishop Fitzgerald, one of the other defensive backs from NC State. Florida's been linked with him. He visited Penn State this past weekend And it was looking good for a Monday decision for the Nittany Lions, but defensive coordinator Tom Allen just took the Clemson job, as it was announced on Monday. So perhaps that opens the door for Florida. He's going to be on campus Thursday as well. So a trio of defensive backs being reported on multiple outlets that going to be on campus this Thursday. I think we've seen, as I mentioned, you've lost guys to Miami, you lost guys to Georgia, with guys Florida looking for some versatile options, star, corner, safety. Definitely, you can see it just by who they've been targeting. They really see secondary as a huge need in the transfer portal.
As does anyone who watched the Florida defense in 2023 and 2024. I mean, look, DBDB, clearly a place where Florida needs to emphasize. Their best defensive back from last year is Triquez Bridges. He's going to be gone. Jason Marshall, he's also gone. Devin Moore struggled to stay healthy. Castell didn't take the step forward. Thornton was sort of on and off this year. So you start looking at the guys who they brought in last year in the portal. Some of them panned out, some of them didn't. And yeah, that's the spot. I do think there's going to be a lot of criticism about the transfer portal and how aggressive Florida's been, and I think deservedly so in some respects. But the other thing is, when we got together last week, we had heard, but it had not been confirmed yet, that Tyreek Sapp was coming back, and that guy was by far the best player on Florida's defense. Whether you look at PFF, whether you look at sacks, whether you look at, I don't care what stat you look at, that guy was wreaking havoc all over the place. And so keeping Banks and keeping Sapp probably gives you way more value than trying to bring in replacements for those guys.
Would you feel? Yeah, I've asked the fan or on the Discord. It's like, would you feel better if those guys that went to the NFL and you got transfer guys just to make you feel better about the transfer portal? No,
we'd be pointing to it. I mean, unless it's like Harold Perkins, no,
yeah,
right? I mean, it's one of those things where you're just like, Walter Nolan, is he available? Okay, like, yeah. Yes. I mean, so Florida's done a very nice job of keeping their players together. Like you talked about offensive tackle. They're going to bring back 4 of their 5 offensive linemen. Mm-hmm. And so, continuity there, pretty strong. Wide receiver, obviously, there have been a lot of guys coming with the Wilson signing, and you got Ventrell Brown. Then you've got Sturdivant coming in as well. So, again, you're starting to feel kind of good about that spot as well. The one place I just really have a lot of concern about is safety specifically, right? The explosive plays. Florida had to play a ton of cover 2 to protect the back end of their defense last year. And things didn't really start to improve until the defensive line started to take another step forward. Obviously, you lose Pyburn, but you keep these other 2 guys on the interior. You're going to need a couple of guys to step up, but then you're going to need some reinforcements back there. There's limited spots left for Florida, in fact. And so that's one of the things I think might end up being a silver lining here is if they can find a backup quarterback, if a guy like Clay Millen, or if Aiden Warner turns out, if they look at it and go, he can win us a game or 2, like he's better than what he showed on the field. Well, now if you've got another spot of defensive back, because I think I said it last week, stack. Like the first guy might not work out, but stack a bunch of guys to make sure that you've done it. Because Florida doesn't need to get that much better than they were the second half of the year on defense with Lagow at quarterback. And in fact, there were all those stats about Lagow in games that he actually started and finished what his record was. Some of that is that the defense was playing awesome by the time Lagow was starting. And so the combination of a guy who can make explosives and a defense that's playing the way Florida's defense was, is a pretty deadly combination, even with some of the limitations that the Gators have. So anything they can do to allow them to be more multiple, to get those guys, Sapp and Banks, more one-on-ones, right? Mm-hmm. To make the offensive line have to respect that Florida might bring a blitz because they can protect on the back end, even if they go single high safety, even if they end up with a safety and one-on-one coverage. Those are all the things that I think Florida's going to need to get better at. And so it's awesome to see that they're bringing in all these defensive backs. But obviously, just like with Purdie, you got to bring them in, you got to keep them, and they got to be on the field when 2025 starts.
Yeah, man, it's kind of where we'll go next, and kind of what it maybe means for 25. But your favorite Gators, and that's where we'll transition to now before we wrap up on this episode of Gators Breakdown. And I threw out, a couple popular tweets, finally getting around to them, as I said. Just been a lot going on here. So I threw out there, Lagow is a given, because he would have just dominated the comments, of course. So, which
I'm talking about.
Yeah. Which Florida player did you enjoy watching the most this past season, and why? And will 2 players mention the most, one from each side of the ball? So let's go offense, running back Jaden Ball. He was the player mentioned the most. Performance, impact, of course. He earned freshman All-SEC honors this past season. Had a huge impact. Impressive season, 673 yards on 133 carries, 5-yard average per carry, 7 touchdowns. Had those standout performances against Kentucky and LSU. Of course, against Kentucky, 5 touchdowns there against the Wildcats. And in that LSU matchup, of course, he sealed a victory with that explosive 55-yard touchdown run. And Will, maybe the biggest thing, and this was brought up a good bit too, filling the void left by Trevor Etienne. We wondered how Florida would replace Trevor Etienne. Jaden Ball did admirably in his first season here. And of course, we'll get into some comments here, do some favorable comparisons to some former Gators there at the running back spot as well. And it's just, there's 5 touchdowns against Kentucky. He can dominate games with their dominate moments like he did against LSU. It's just, awesome to see, excited to see what a year 2 with him gets. And Gator Steve-O, so this is why I want to share. Everybody had some good comments. Go share a little bit of those. Ball showed, Gator Steve-O said on Twitter, that there was 0 drop-off for us at running back and that the position is actually brighter down the road from losing Etienne to outperforming him. Preston Walsh says Jaden Ball, he finishes runs with authority, can also go to distance for 6. Florida Gators #1 sports fan says Ball, he got tossed in the spotlight and delivered, got a lot of playing time, certainly made the most of it, looked like he was supposed to be out there. And then Real Deal C. Neal interacted a good bit on their own Twitter. Says, I think I read those wrong, but anyway, you get the gist of the. I read them out of order, but you get the gist of. Hey, there was a lot of excitement there for Jaden Ball, what he was able to do. There's freshman accolades, dynamic player at the running back spot. Now Montrell Johnson, of course, the departuring. He's looking like he's going to be the guy now at the running back spot, and an expanded role coming up for him, of course. But let's not forget Jacoby Jackson, pair it with him as well. And while he didn't have the explosive runs that Ball had, still major impact there for Jacoby Jackson. Got to bring up a little bit. Minor injury. Ball currently recovering from a minor offseason surgery. Had that arthroscopic procedure, that minor cartilage damage in his meniscus. Kind of very similar to what Montrell Johnson had right before the season. Remember, he was back. He got hurt in fall camp, was back for game 1 versus Miami. So minor procedure here for Ball. Expected to be ready for spring camp. So full recovery. Should be on the field for spring. No long-term concerns there. Jaden Ball was by far and away, Will, the most excited player that the Gator Nation was seeing on the field in 2024. Besides DJ Lightweight.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, I thought Ball was great. I mean, look at his PFF ranking; it's 81.1 overall. From a pass block ranking, he was 68, which is better than Etienne's bet if you add his last 2 years together. I think in terms of pass protection. But Jacoby Jackson was real close. He was right behind, 77.9 overall. He was actually really good pass blocking, and he was a much better threat through the air, caught more passes and was a better threat through the air as well. So the 1-2 punch of Jackson and Baugh were really exciting for Florida to see, especially since Montrell Johnson went down early with an injury and wasn't really himself even when he came back. And, we learned a lot that when he did come back, he didn't immediately slot right back into that starter spot, right? Like he came back and they were like, we're gonna work you back in slowly there, Chief, because we got this guy over here who's pretty good. The 5 touchdowns against Kentucky were a little bit overrated from the standpoint of DJ Lagow kept getting him down to the 1 with Badger, and then they didn't let him punch it in. But still, how often have we seen Florida struggle in the red zone from the 1-yard line, not be able to punch the ball in? So, having a guy who has great ball security, I can't remember him putting the ball on the ground. Somebody who has Jackson put it on the ground against Texas. It really kind of killed that game. But I don't remember Baugh putting the ball on the ground. So you figure a true freshman coming in, you're making him run hard between the tackles, get those tough yards down in the red zone. He was able to do it without putting the ball on the ground. And then between both him and Jackson, both being good at pass blocking, which again, if you think about what Florida needs, they need somebody to be able to make sure Lagow doesn't end up on the ground. So there were multiple times where I can remember, a blitzing linebacker coming, the running back gets in the way enough that allows the ball to get off for Lagow. So those are the things that you don't necessarily always see when you're watching Lagow do something otherworldly, but when the running back can step up and do that, that's obviously a great thing. And then, again, to me, it's still the run against LSU, right? It's put the game away when there's an opportunity. Like Florida needed to run the ball to run up the clock, and between Lagow hitting the check down to Hansen for a first down, and then Baugh hitting the home run to take it all the way in for the touchdown, those will sort of be some enduring images. And I was there with Max, so part of it's just me being there and it being live. But that was also when Florida changed the season, right? I mean,
and he had the very next game had that nice catch and run pass against Ole Miss.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I think anytime a true freshman is contributing, you need to pay attention. But when they're essentially one of your best offensive players, then it's like, okay, what does the future hold? Now, we have seen in the past, obviously, with ETN leaving, and then Montrell Johnson sort of – like Johnson never took a next step, right? He was who he was for the time that he was at Florida, which was a very good back, but didn't take the next step. That'll be my question for these two guys is there a next step? Does the explosive run against LSU turn into 4, 5, 6 explosive runs next year, especially with Florida's continuity on the offensive line? And if Baugh can do what he did and then add a few more explosives, well, now all of a sudden you're talking about a guy who's threatening to get 1,000 yards. And, that's not something that happens at Florida every day, certainly. So hopefully he gets that opportunity next year.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to that comment from Gator Steve-O since I got out of order there. Ball was just awesome to watch. Runs like Dameon Pierce and gets the carries in our offense. Excited to see what 4 years will produce. So, yeah, I mean, I remember going back and the hype started in the spring game, Will, for Jaden Ball. And you always wonder, is it just a spring game star or is it just somebody who will just go away? Will there be a spring game star, just go away? You never hear from him during the regular season. That wasn't the case with Ball. He kept up, and as Carolina Fishing puts in here, don't forget about Webb's Trayon Webb return as well. So Florida pretty deep at running back, as we know. But a good little comparison to the Dameon Pierce. I remember a lot of people throwing that out when they were watching him in the spring game of the physicality and the way he can make guys miss was something that really stands out in comparison to one Dameon Pierce. So let's go to the other side here.
Hold on. Hopefully they give him more than 5 carries a game next year. Sorry, could resist.
Yes. The other player, maybe it should have. I guess it did surprise me a little bit just how much he was mentioned. And that was nickel star Aaron Gates. John Seibel said on the post, Gates all over the place, nose for the ball, showed he's legit. And we discussed Gates some because of Florida and what they are pursuing in the transfer portal, like we mentioned, of some versatile defensive backs that could fit in the nickel role, the safety role. So we've discussed Gates a bit, but now it's mainly because of the injury. So he sustained that versus Ole Miss in the second play of the game. Didn't return, of course, missing the FSU game and the bowl game. Made 5 starts and 10 appearances, 27 tackles, 4 tackles for loss for Gates, 3 pass breakups, 2 fumble recoveries, an interception, and a quarterback hurry. And we all saw it. Napier had to say after the injury that Aaron has been one of our best players the last probably 5 or 6 weeks of the season. Still a young player, but extremely talented. And that was right after the Ole Miss game. So it was a knee injury. We all hope he can bounce back from because he was, coming along pretty good, playing physical, coming down, making tackles. In his last 4 games, he had at least 4 tackles in the game, 4 against Kentucky and Georgia, 8 against Texas, and 4 against LSU. So against Georgia, had on back-to-back plays. He had a tackle for loss and a play later. Had an interception with a 30-yard return. Against LSU, had a stop on a 3rd and 2, holding a pass to 0 yards and forcing a punt, which eventually led to a Gators touchdown. So, of course, at the nickel spots, Gates wasn't by himself. You have Sharif Denson. He played well there too, and was able to take over. Not much of a drop-off late in the season. hopefully Gates bounces back fast, continues to give Florida options at the spot there, Will. But a player that really caught the attention of Gator Nation because it was a lot of people pointed it out right there on X. B. Tambling said Aaron Gates, as others have mentioned, haven't seen the defensive back hit like that and be all over the field in ages, it feels like. Coach Jay Salas said there were a few, but I really enjoyed watching the duo of Denson and Gates. Both made plays. Both were fantastic against the run. Both played strong coverage. Both really locked down one of the toughest positions on the field. And Joshua Moore, well, I'll save that one in just a second. But that was all the lauding of the defensive player that was mentioned the most. One, Aaron Gates.
And Gates is interesting. He's gonna be a polarizing figure, especially as he comes back off the injury. When I look at the advanced stats, they're not very good.
Right.
And it's not just sort of like the first 3 games of the year and then he picked it up. His advanced stats look really good against Georgia, and then other than that, they're sort of they're kind of pedestrian. The EPA per play allowed for Florida, it is better though when he's on the field versus when he's off. And I think this is almost like, in many ways, it's like the Colts when they used to have Bob Sanders, going back years, right? In the Peyton Manning years, but they used to have Bob Sanders. He could only stay healthy like 3 games a year. But they got him healthy in the playoffs 1 year, and that's the year the Colts won the Super Bowl, because Sanders, when he was on the field, just everything felt different. And so the aggressiveness that Gates brings, sort of the attitude, like, and you didn't see. I remember towards the end of the year, it was after Gates had gone down. There were a couple of runs to the outside where Triquez Bridges just took on a running back and just mauled him and took him down on the ground. And I go, no one did that for the Florida defense until Aaron Gates did it a couple of times. It was almost like he was like, I might screw up the play, but I am going to go balls to the wall 100% every single play. And I think that's what you're seeing in some of the PFF ratings. I think it's that there are times that he's out of position. There are times where he's not able to make the tackle, but there's never a time where he's not going 100% and bringing an attitude that then permeates its way through the rest of the team. And that's an important part of a guy who's going to be in run support as a nickel corner and essentially acting as sort of like another safety out there at times. And so given that Florida has struggled at the safety position specifically, having somebody who can go up there and shore up run support. Look,
we saw as the season went on. Like, the whole secondary was, like you said, Denson. We saw Castell did it towards later in the season as well. But yeah, I like your point of, taking on the Gates personality.
Look, the on-off numbers don't lie. The EPA per play, so EPA, the more negative it is, the better, is negative 0.11 when he's on. It's negative 0.02 when he's off. So the defense was wasn't terrible when he was off, but it was really, really good when he was on. And so sort of look at that and go, okay, well, there's got to be something to this that there's a difference just when he's on the field. Now, obviously, his time on the field also started to coincide with some of the defensive linemen stepping up. But also, and I think this is a big part of it, is if you think about what happened as the season went along, Florida really started playing a lot more coverage. Well, how can you do that? The only way you can do that is if you've got corners, specifically that slot corner, who's going to come up and run support and really contribute, really fill the gaps and make sure that nothing turns into something big heading at those safeties. Because our safeties have not been gifted enough in recent years to come up and get a running back or a wide receiver on a screen in space when the guy's got a running start. Right? Like, you got to get him before he gets the running start. So, the big hits from Gates are the things that I think everybody remembers. There was the reverse, I think maybe against Tennessee, or maybe it was Georgia, but I remember him staying home on a reverse. I was like, that never happens. Like, when somebody on the defense stay behind. But I think more than anything, a lot of the things that I think of with him are where he went hard at a wide receiver who was getting a screen and maybe didn't make the tackle, but slowed him up to where the rest of the pursuit could get him. And it's like a 1 or a 2 yard gain rather than what would have happened in the past, which is the defensive back would have taken on the blocker and sort of like funneled him to the outside, but it wouldn't have slowed him down. And so now you've got a running wide receiver coming at one of your safeties, and Florida hasn't been able to make that tackle in years. So him coming back and coming back strong, obviously, will be a big part of Florida's defense. But that's also why I'm saying DB in the transfer portal, because ACL injuries are not 6-month recoveries. They're just not. And so you're probably talking about a guy who maybe is ready at the end of fall camp to go. But is he going to be 100%? Is he still going to be that motor? Is it still going to be like have that influence on the defense? And, honestly, if Lagow can kind of carry him for 5 or 6 weeks, I'll welcome Bob Sanders back for the second half of the year. Let's plug him in there and go for the playoff, man.
There you go. Harrison Sanchez with a good point. How quickly we get Gates and Lions back will be huge, because remember, Lions went down preseason fall camp, and it was kind of mentioned right there along with Cam Jackson to be a 1A, 1B at that spot. And he goes down. So if Gators can get the guys back quickly, if we talked about the portal and maybe filling in those two positions of need, it certainly looks like Florida has really honed in on maybe Gates taking some time to come back and getting some depth and some impact at that star safety spot. Keeping it going here, Joshua Moore, he brought up an interesting player. I didn't want to overlook this. Look, there was a lot of Tyreek Sapp. There was a lot of Caleb Banks. There was a lot of Triquez Bridges. A lot of the DK and Badger on the offensive side. But the two guys mentioned here were taken away with the comments there. But Joshua Moore brought up an interesting one. He says Najee Harris. And I thought, okay, I like that. I wanted to point that one out because he said learning wide zone was always going to take some time. And while it helps playing next to a future NFL center, Harris' ability to punch on the double team, climb to the next level, make tough reach blocks, and most importantly, finish violently is, to me, a thing of beauty. So I had to point that out. He goes in depth. Looks like there's maybe an offensive line background there from Joshua. So certainly a player that's not going to get a whole lot of love when you do little comments like this on X. Certainly showing one right there.
Sounds like Joshua might have a future breaking down film for reading reactions is what it sounds like. I got to be honest, man. Nobody pointed out your boy. Nobody enjoyed seeing Pup play all year long.
Q Lee, maybe in the comments here on YouTube. I can't wait to get Pup back. So maybe, maybe Q.
Certainly people who know Gator Dave need to know they're getting on the podcast if they talk about Pup. I mean, that's the way to go, man.
That's true. He was mentioned a few times in there, but of course, certainly was one of my favorites. I hated that he went down with that injury, but hey, look, I mean. He's won more since he missed kind of that last stretch of Florida winning a whole bunch of games. Add him into that mix of Lions and Gates and maybe those guys on the field together, fully healthy, ready to go for Florida near the beginning of the season. Lions, we'll see. I mean, that's just a big guy with a bad injury. How fast can he come back? Of course. All right, before we wrap up, going a little bit longer than the hour here. Favorite memories as well from 2024, how it relates to 25. These players that we mentioned certainly are going to be on the field for the Gators in 25. Certainly pillars of what you can build off of for the Gators 2025 season. And Jeremy Morris said Cormani with a pick. That was a good memory there for a good bit. Justin Wood said getting to go to my first Florida State game with my sister and seeing it's great to be a Florida Gator all the way out to the stadium. There's a highlight of one Jaden Ball run versus LSU. Jed Pete says McLean pick 6, Ball 44-yard touchdown versus LSU. And number 3, the Dart meltdown. I like that one. That was pretty good. Matthew Walker says this one, favorite memory is visiting the Swamp for the first time and seeing DJ's first start. Favorite plays, probably Jaden Ball's touchdown run versus LSU. Mike MZ Watt says Lagway's amazing first down conversion throws on the same drive where it definitely looked like he was sacked against LSU. Dusty Bubbles, Dustin, he says the Lagway to Aid Mizell touchdown versus Georgia. Let's see. This one's cool. Lake City Gator says, took my daughter to her first game and it was against Kentucky. Walked in with the drum line, electric atmosphere, night game, and we dominated. Could not have asked for more. Will, I know that one's probably going to speak to you. You kind of mentioned it earlier, the LSU game, favorite memory there, of course, because Max getting, all the snacks and drinks and everything he could take at Harmonic Woods, and then going into the stadium and watching the big Gator win.
Yeah, man. So my favorite memory from that game, there were a lot of them, obviously, but Tyreek Sapp gets a sack in the third quarter, and then the stadium's going nuts, and then it goes into "We Are the Boys" and won't back down, and then they have the punt that DK dropped that we all freaked out about to open up the fourth quarter. But still, I mean, it was pretty clear that Florida was going to have the ball deep in LSU territory after that punt. So Sapp gets the big sack. That's probably the one that sort of stands out in my mind from a personal perspective, just because the "We Are the Boys" and the "Won't Back Down" with a little kid at the swamp who's all sugared up is a lot of fun. I'm surprised nobody mentioned when Lagow hit the first deep shot to Badger against Samford.
Oh wait, that was Mizell. No,
it was Badger, right? Against Samford.
Yeah, not the touchdown to Mizell, but the first.
Yeah, the one where Badger got caught from behind.
Yeah.
And theme of the season, gets caught at the one so Baugh can punch it in. But he hits that deep throw down the sideline, and I just went, oh. Like that was one of those where I was
it is there.
Well, and I looked at it and I go, I've seen that in high school. Like I'd watched enough of that guy's tape. And in fact, in our preseason magazine last year, had a breakdown of DJ Lagow where we were like linking to his high school huddle film and stuff. And like it was the exact thing that I had seen on the tape, his anticipation, being able to hit that deep throw. And obviously that transferred the whole way through. But that was one where I went, oh. And I know it's Samford, and we had to come on afterwards and put all those caveats in there, and so that people didn't think we were crazy. But that was the moment right then. He hit that pass, and I went, oh. And then he had the one later where he like stepped up in the pocket and threw a dart, and that was the one to Mizell, right? And
yeah.
And that's the one where you're like, that looks like something AR did. But
we did that little unique. Somehow throwing off, where he jumps and leaps a little bit when he throws.
But see, that's the thing is the stuff that gets me excited about Lagow were the throws that he made within the process of the offense. Because I don't think anybody doubts that he can make some of these special plays when things break down and that sort of stuff. At least now nobody does because they've seen him do it. At this point, the thing that he's going to have to develop and the thing that I want to see is, can you do it in the normal flow of the offense? And so that first pass to Badger was within the flow of the offense. And we didn't really see that against Miami. And so then he comes out against Samford and all of a sudden we see it. And so, again, I mean, 2024, 2025, and 2026, we can talk about all these guys, but those 3 seasons are all going to be about DJ Lagow. And so out of non-Max memories, that's the stuff that stands out.
Good stuff. Yeah, we could go on for, that was a long, both of those topics were very popular. I could go on for hours of all the replies that we got there, but those are the ones that stood out the most, and players that stood out the most, and memories that stand out the most. And hey, look, a lot of them link themselves to 2025 because it's Lagow, it's Ball, it's Mizell, it's Gates, it's Pup, it's just players that are going to be on this team next year. And Banks and Sapp returning. So there's a lot to like. There's a good foundation for what to build on from what we saw in 2024 go into 2025.
So what was yours, Dave? Was it Pup making the stop against Miami to force the field goal on the second drive?
That's a good one. Probably the Ball touchdown run. That one really is going to stick with most people for sure.
It wasn't the Mertz QB sneak against Tennessee.
No, but speaking of that Tennessee game, I did almost go, and I know it was a losing effort, so I kind of hate going that, but Lagway's pass to DK.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, jumping up and like just, oh, okay, yeah, there you go. I mean, the game wasn't, the Lagway was average at best before that, but still really kind of stuck it out, got thrown into a hostile situation. It's crazy in Knoxville. Comes in and just that was it third down? It was fourth down, right?
Yeah.
Fourth down and
fourth down, like 13, something like that.
Yeah, and just zings one in right there to DK, and that let me know. Yeah, okay. I don't care what happened after that. I know he got hurt, and there was the FSU game wasn't the best, Tulane game wasn't the best, but including that and everything else he showed me says, all right, he's got the moxie to be the quarterback of Florida.
Well, and fourth down, like what was it, a week prior, maybe 2 weeks prior against Arkansas, Nico just run out of bounds. on fourth down instead of letting it go. So, he stepped up in the pocket when he got pressured on fourth down and flushed and realized he had nothing he could do at that point and got pushed out of bounds. And the comparison is Lagow keeping his eyes up when he gets flushed in the pocket, finding the guy downfield and putting it in there for the touchdown. Again, losing effort.
You talked about moment earlier with the deep pass against Stanford. That might have been my moment for Lagow, just because, it wasn't just a fling it 60 yards down the field. It was having to make a play.
I don't know, man. I was getting a text from you in the stadium in the LSU game when he stepped up and hit Badger down to the 1 when the 2 defensive ends came around and he stepped up and threw it there. I remember, I think you texted me and went like, oh boy, like we got one here or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was definitely, he's our guy. And everybody in that stadium was nodding along with you there, Dave. So a lot of good moments this year, especially in the back half of the year.
Yeah.
A lot of fun heading into next year, man.
For sure. All right, that'll do it. There's a good bit of nostalgia. Short nostalgia. It's hard to say 2024 is nostalgia, but hey, we got to move on to 2025. This will be about one of our last looks of 24. National championship game is next week between Ohio State and Notre Dame. So of course we know what next week's show will be on Tuesday, since there's a national championship game Monday night. But we already know we get to talk about something we haven't got to talk about in quite some time. Way too early rankings that Florida will be found in. So it's a conversation we haven't had to have in recent years. We get to have it next week.
They like DJ Lagow too. It's kind of nice to have a quarterback that we're not trying to convince ourselves is good. To have a quarterback where everybody else has to convince us to sort of slow our roll. Yeah. Right. Like it's been a welcome change to have people go, all right, Will, you're talking about statues here. Let's get a little bit aggressive. And I'm like, have you seen the kid play? and he did sort of slow my enthusiasm there in those last couple of games. So there's still clearly some work to be done, but I have no doubt that Lagow is going to put it in, and it's going to be awesome, man. I saw was it on 3 a couple of weeks ago, had Florida like 9th.
Yeah,
or something like that. So if Florida ends up the season finish 9th, we're going playoff, boys. Yeah. So let's enjoy it.
Yep, for sure. All right, good stuff. Will Miles at Will Miles SEC. Read and reaction. You can check him out there. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown right here. David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thank you for joining us on this episode of Gators Breakdown.